Welcome to this special virtual series with ISACA leaders. We're hearing from cybersecurity ISACA leaders from the United States, Australia and New Zealand. This is our third session within the last 2 days, and the closing session will be tomorrow. But we've had State of Cyber Part 1. This morning we crossed to the US and Chicago with one of the authors of the State of Privacy report. This is the third session looking at the state of trust. And then we'll close off tomorrow with State of Cyber Part 2, just to wrap it all up in terms of cybersecurity, privacy and trust and how they all fit. For those who aren't aware, I'm the series moderator. My name's Chris Cubbage. I'm the director with MySecurity Media, and we've been doing this series with ISACA for a number of years now as well. So a proud ISACA member here in Sydney. The protocols, this session is being recorded and will be made available. Yesterday's session on cybersecurity part 1 is available on the website, and I'm literally processing this morning's session as we speak. Questions are very much welcome, so please use the Q&A for questions. Comments are welcome. Let us know where you're listening from, particularly ISACA members, but otherwise please use the Q&A as it pops up for us to address and is also noted. We won't go more than 60 minutes. We have allowed for 60 minutes, but given that we're talking about trust and where this discussion goes, we won't be set on time necessarily. Thank you to our national partners, Fugro Spark and Curtin University, and our series partners, Security Exhibition and Conference, which will be at the ICC in August, Kinetic IT, Cisco and Vanta. And for this particular session, Vanta is our session partner, and we will also be referring to the State of Trust report with Vanta, as well as the State of Digital Trust with ISACA. As I mentioned, this is an ongoing series, so the State of Cybersecurity report and the State of Privacy report is also very relevant with this series. And trust is going to be an interesting discussion where it all fits in that ecosystem. So just referring, we've yesterday covered off on the State of Cybersecurity. Thank you to our panel yesterday. Today we're also joined by Jamie, Jason and Reshma. So a good continuation of yesterday's discussion on cyber. And I mentioned this morning we had State of Privacy with Safia Kazi in Chicago and Joe Stewart-Rattray, who's the Oceanic ambassador for ISACA as well. Very good discussion this morning on privacy, which links directly, obviously, naturally, to trust. If you don't have a copy, in fact, my apologies, in the show notes right now, I've just put into the chat the relevant links for these reports, the State of Digital Trust report and the State of Trust report with Vanta. Interesting when you look at these two reports. I'm going to hand over and introduce our panel, but these two reports are quite interesting. The ISACA report looked at around 5,800 survey participants, and the Vanta went for about 2,500 globally, with about 500 in Australia. So they are worth having a look and some of the outcomes. But please let me welcome the panel today. Jamie Norton, who's on the Global ISACA board. Jamie, thanks again from Canberra.
Thank you, Chris.
Great. And then crossing to Auckland, we've got Jason Wood, former president with Auckland. Jason, thanks again for joining us. And just in case you're not aware, we've just roped in Jason to join us again tomorrow for the part 2 for the wrap up. So that's great. And Reshma Devi from Melbourne chapter. Reshma, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And Evan Rowse with Vanta, but also from the Auckland chapter and a proud ISACA member. Evan, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Wonderful. Now, Evan, I'll put you in the hot seat. Not only is Vanta as our partner, but you said off screen that you've read both reports. So I thought let's start with you as well. Yeah, just where did you find also the bit of language change here in trust versus digital trust? I imagine Vanta's thinking about digital trust in that context. Maybe set the scene for us between these two reports and some of the key, sort of trends, I suppose, that we're hearing about and where trust fits into the ecosystem.
Great. I'll try and summarize what I think of the report. Some of them are fairly lengthy. What you'll find in those reports, there's actually two versions. Vanta has a State of Trust report as well as the State of Trust Australia report. So of those 2,500 leaders that were surveyed for the Trust report, about 500 of them are coming from Australia. I think, one of the things that we can really think about in terms of framing how these two reports are speaking about similar things is probably the likes of trust becoming it's more important that we put a pragmatic approach on trust. Otherwise, trust effectively, what we're seeing is becoming more and more difficult to obtain and maintain. So, both of those reports have some really interesting statistics, which I think we'll go through. Some of those stats we'll go through in the call today. But yeah, really calling out a couple of things that the reports kind of both probably highlight is areas around risk, areas around compliance, as you imagine, touches on some governance aspects naturally in the kind of GRC space. Lots of mentions of AI in both of them. I mean, hot space at the moment, specifically in all the areas of GR and C. Both reports do have some, we'll say, some effectively positive spins on the world of trust and where it is right now, as well as some potential actionable takeaways that you can go home with. So I don't know if that sets a scene, but yeah, I was just going to introduce myself really quickly. As I've been working in GRC for the last 15 years. I've led various security teams and risk and compliance programs working for really large companies, and think of companies like Xero or Workday, to smaller companies trying to really establish effectively security trust, but also privacy trust. And as we kind of grow into that, all kind of elements of that. So yeah, back to you.
Thanks, Evan. And you made an interesting point there of security trust. So trust is also internal in terms of the security team and how the organisation trusts that security team, as well as the external trust. Just having a look at the ISACA report here, trust seems to be around reputation, and that's sort of the outcome. And I'm just noticing on the numbers for this series, we had good numbers yesterday in terms of attendance, lower for privacy, and sort of halfway there for trust. And the language around what people would expect in terms of cybersecurity, trust and privacy, even though they're all very much related, the interest factor sort of drops off. Jamie, we were talking pre-session on where trust fits into the ecosystem of, I suppose, this language, and even how boards might view trust, and how you add a value onto it as well. Generally, how do you find that the topic of trust and reputation, is it directly linked? Are there other nuances to it? And when you went through a report like this, the value that it has for business to take note?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think trust is a bit of a broad church from my perspective. I think ISACA, we have the mission of advancing digital trust, but that's really capturing a lot of our broad constituency, and for those on the call that are ISACA members, security and cyber is a big part of what we do, but we equally have, a governance mandate, we have an assurance mandate, and then we have emerging kind of mandates in privacy and in AI and other fundamental areas as well. So it is a broad church, and when we talk about digital trust in the context of this survey, we're really talking about things like the quality of information availability, as well as the traditional security, privacy, transparency, integrity, all of those elements. So it does capture quite a lot, and resiliency, as you mentioned, is a key part of that as well. So, I mean, to answer the question too, in terms of the board, I find, in my experience working with boards and being on the board myself now with ISACA, we tend to deal with more specific topics within the trust framework. So we'll talk about security, or we might talk about privacy, and then availability or business continuity may be a specific thing we talk about. So we'll break down the various trust elements into something a little bit more specific. But I think as a broad kind of concept of all the things that ISACA covers, it's a useful construct because it allows us to have surveys like this where we can compare and contrast between the two elements.
Yeah, I think it is that all catchphrase. So the key factors on the digital trust report, in terms of what is encapsulated, is quality, availability, security and privacy, ethics and integrity, transparency and honesty, and resiliency. So these are very sort of broad terms, and all have quite different values, I suppose. Maybe to you, Reshma, in terms of trust, how that fits in with you, And again, just with reflecting on those key factors, how much do we sort of value trust
Yeah.
in a cybersecurity context?
Sure. I mean, we've moved from the world of where, we used to have trust into something or someone or an organization, and now we are wanting proof of that digital trust with the organizations we deal with. So that's now moved from that belief of a trust into the confidence of trust, and that comes through the things that Jamie's just mentioned around that integrity, reliability of your systems and technologies and things like that. And when it comes to security, we talk about that the digital trust comes into ensuring that our digital systems are protected from breaches, unauthorized access, or cyber threats and things like that. So we're moving into that era of organizations to provide that. We also mentioned, you mentioned, Chris, about the compliance, and even mentioned about the GRC side of it, because these things give you that confidence. Trust is not something that you can just go and sort of like, here's my scale, I'm going to measure it, and then I'm all ticked off for that. These are the things that help us behind the scene, whether it is meeting your Privacy Act with safeguarding your personal and sensitive information from misuse, etc., or being transparent about how your data is collected and protected and used. These things build trust. And for me is to bring these things in the work we do. And both report actually has a lot of similarities in the way that has come through those themes. So I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit more in depth, but it has, you can see a lot of similarities into what digital trust means in both reports.
Is it, and over to I'll come to Jason, but I was going to open up to the panel, does digital trust sit within the compliance framework? Does being compliant sort of tick the trust box? Jason, what's your thought on something like that?
Yeah, I guess it depends on the organization and kind of how they look at it, because as we've all discussed and probably experienced, I mean, we look at trust in a lot of different ways, and you look at it from a system perspective and say, how can I trust the systems that we're deploying? And that really gets into digital trust to make sure we have confidentiality, integrity, availability, and all of those good concepts, down to, can we trust our third-party vendors and people that we're working with, because many of them are the effective record keepers or the effective systems that we're utilizing, SaaS providers or what have you. So when you look at it, it's like, well, trust could sit in compliance, it could sit in the cyber team, it could sit in legal, it could sit through operations, everywhere. So yeah, so and I know as what I end up doing is I wear my ISACA hat, and we're always talking about digital trust, and then in my professional capacity, it's funny. It's like I even trademarked my own little thing, and it's called Building Digital Trust Together, which almost mimics a lot of what ISACA does, because ISACA is about building digital trust. So at the end of the day, I mean, I do think it could sit within compliance, but it could also sit in many other areas of an organization.
Maybe to Jamie, is there any sort of guideline? Well, I was going to say guidelines. It's not really the guidelines, but what's the sort of framework of trust? Is it just ethical business practices? Is it just a change in language that has traditionally been business ethics? I'm just, again, looking at things that have been measured within the report is positive reputation, reliable data for decision making, fewer privacy breaches, fewer cybersecurity incidents, stronger customer loyalty, faster innovation due to confidence in technology, and potentially higher revenue. They are the trusted benefits. But there's longevity. Trust gets built, right? Much like ethics, ethical behaviour builds that trust.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you're sort of hitting the sort of nail on the head there around it being cultural almost. So it's almost in the DNA of an organisation, and it's probably not one area obviously security and compliance and assurance are all areas that would have a trust element, but indeed it would flow all the way through to the board and down through the executive ranks as well. And it touches a number of different areas. So it's definitely a cultural reinforcement that the business would have, and it's a continuum as well. I think for any decision, even as we make as consumers about what we're doing day to day with different organisations, we have an inherent trust sort of assessment we do, and it is a little bit of a risk assessment. Do we trust company A versus company B? And we get a sense if a company's had breaches, or if we know that they've mishandled data previously, or there's quality issues or ethics issues and these things, then we tend to have that kind of perspective. So I think it comes out culturally, and it's all about how the organisation handles that, and how seriously they take it, and what governance processes they've got in place to build that sort of systems of trust in everything they do. So that's, I think, my perspective.
Yeah, and Evan, coming to your experience, you mentioned 15 years and quite a varied range of organisations. How did you find each sort of size values their trust? Because Jamie hit on a good point of, we all do a sort of personal risk assessment when we're dealing with an organisation, but they tend to be large organisations when you're in the sort of the public realm. But trust within supply chains, trust within sort of market segments is very, very important, particularly smaller sort of focused industries. Yeah, just your general take on how trust varies between organisation sizes and markets.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I was probably just want to go a couple of steps back a few years ago. When we thought about security teams are often just a part of, for example, IT teams, right? So you might have somebody working in IT or the likes. We progressed so far along that line in terms of taking organizations along a journey. You've actually got a security function. You might have a privacy function nowadays in many companies that are not even that large. You might have somebody who's in the privacy function, not just the privacy key contact. I'm definitely seeing more and more organizations actually have trust functions, sometimes, again, within security team, very often kind of with cross-functional requirement, or it's a cross-functional mandate as in terms of a job or function to work across enterprise risk management teams, legal teams, ethics teams, because trust is not all about security, even though that has been probably the focus for a number of years. Security and confidentiality even more so than ever. We're caring about trusting an organization because of what it does with our confidential information. One of the recent kind of giants to make a bit of a mistake in this area, not surprisingly, but at the same time sad it's happened, is with Apple. Do you trust Apple with the recording on your phone constantly? Ultimately these are trusted brands. These are large players which we put a lot of trust in, whereas many brands we instinctively don't trust, but at the same time give them all of our information. There are some brands out there that we care about and love, and sometimes we do lose trust because of something bad. What I'm seeing organizations, and just a kind of a thought of something that might happen. We see, for example, ISACA's DTEF framework, does touch on a number of elements of trust, which is great. Organizations have spent a lot of money in security trust, right? They're starting to spend a lot more in privacy trust and demonstrating things that they don't even need to. But yeah, we probably will see improvement in all of those areas of trust. But it's great to see organizations like ISACA coming out with, actually, what does it take to trust a business? Because yeah, you can bet Apple had all of the kind of functions in place. They're big enough to have every single function and every single silo of GRC and trust, and yet still probably made a bit of a mistake there, right? So yeah, I do think we're going to see change more holistically in terms of trust, but trust and reputation has always been, or has been built into security for as long as I can remember. What is a security breach? What would the impact be to my reputation of a business, and a reputation in society that ultimately wants to trust in something?
Well, given how broad it is, I'm wondering whether you would have, as an organisation, a trust strategy. There's a lot there encapsulating that as well, because I think there's opportunity in a market as it is today, with rapidly changing technology and geopolitics and the like. It's quite a crazy world. I think to have strong trust or trust value could be quite a market point here. I think the other one is, and Vanta picks up on it quite nicely, is that the third-party risk. So third-party risk management and supply chain integrity has been quite an important one at the moment, and trust within your supply chain is quite critical. Insights there, either coming to Jason or Reshma there, and third-party risk management and how that's been escalated, particularly with sort of third-party breaches and moving horizontal through networks in a cyber context.
Yeah, I think we all know that most data breaches happen through our third parties. So it's a place definitely to look, and that's something to build trust with when you have those engagements with your third parties. And I know in both reports they talk about vendor risk. The ISACA report talks about how it's complex in managing those third-party vendor risks, and Venta's report also talks about how organizations have found that experienced data breaches are happening through third-party vendors. So it's definitely an area to look at and tighten up for organizations to, if you want to build trust through that. So the other thing you can say is what happens with third parties is, and where you lose the trust is the data they have and how they lose the data through those breaches. So that's another thing for organizations to really think about. Yes, the trust and reputation is the big part of that, but also people or organizations lose trust is when you were supposed to delete my data and you didn't delete it, and now the breach has happened and I don't want to do business with you anymore because I've lost my trust with you. So through that brand, through that reputation, they're losing that. So that's another part of it where the data should be deleted if it's not needed, and that they should work with third parties. I know for one of the top 4 banks, and one of the banks, it happened here in Australia where they had ceased business with a third party over 5 years ago, and a breach happened with that third party, and the data of the bank, the relationship they had, they still were holding the data. And that's something that should be looked at when organizations come to an end for things like that. Now it's going to get even worse now, and I say worse because now the data is used in our AI for learning and for insights and things like that. So there should also be transparency through third parties or the organizations or where data sharing is happening and how their data is being used. That's again building trust or losing your trust in that way with your third parties.
Well, it's an interesting point. We will definitely sort of go to AI, but yeah, Jason, welcome to follow up on that.
Yeah, no, that was very good, and I'll extend it a little bit. Cause what we have to remember is when we're talking about third parties, that extends to our fourth parties, our fifth parties, our nth parties, and because that entire chain it becomes important, and that's kind of what APRA was trying to address in the CPS 234 when that came out, is just how can we make sure that we're trusting all of our third parties that we're working with. And that's where organizations, when I was working in the US 30 years ago, we were doing all these different trust reports like SOC 2s and ISOs and the equivalent, but it's becoming a lot more prevalent now in Australia and New Zealand and companies. And this was highlighted, I think, actually in these reports we're talking about today, that companies are starting to understand that people want proof that they are secure or that they can trust them, which is where Vanta comes into play and Vanta's platform, right? So and this is where all these third parties, because some of my clients, they're making sure that, we want to do business with a third party. Do they have a SOC 2 report? Do they have an ISO certification? And if they don't, well, many times they won't do business with them now. So it is becoming a very important area to focus on.
I suppose it comes back to there is an opportunity here in the market to maintain and build trust, and I suppose and provide that reassurance. Evan, how does, maybe coming back to that, is from a platform, is that something that Vanta is able to do? Is match, if you're in a sort of supply chain, you can, is it like a score or a rating, or how does that work?
Yeah, so Vanta does have a product in this kind of space, effectively in third-party risk. How we talk about that, right? We found, and I think the State of Trust report says is about 6 or 7 hours a week just assessing vendors for security teams. Now, what I've witnessed firsthand is the bigger a company gets, the more vendors it has, although an average SaaS company probably has the same amount of vendors right in the beginning. So you're spending huge amounts of time and resource on trying to do what we call like vendor assessment, right? If you go look at some of the banks, some of the big US banks, sometimes effectively teams have spun up to 100 people doing these like third-party assessments all over the place. I don't necessarily think that that's the answer, throwing more heads at assessing. And I'm proud to be working for a company that I guess wants to tackle that proposition. Organizations are saying they trust companies. So I think that, again, the report says 70% of people have confidence in vendor security. And at the same time, 46% of breaches came through a vendor. So it's kind of like there's a little bit of disconnect there. So yeah, your third party and fourth and nth party is a really, really good point that Jason brings up. The reality is we probably haven't, as an industry in general, haven't really even hit the nail on the head for third party properly. I'm super interested in, what we're doing in the likes of CPS 234, and let's go after these things that are causing our organizations and countries and citizens problems. Let's go after them, but there is still a large gap just in your third party, I think. So yeah, for organizations that are mature enough, let's go for it. Let's go fourth, nth party, the entire supply chain if we can. But it doesn't necessarily mean throw more heads. AI, if we want to call it that, it really good product tech should be able to release a lot of the pain and toil so that 6.5 hours can be spent better elsewhere. Yeah.
Okay, I was going to. My first thought then was sort of all boats. Sorry, all the tide lifts all boats, right? And I'm thinking of this the national cybersecurity strategy and the like. So, Jamie, that third party, sort of the larger organisations, if they give attention to third party risk management as an example, does that then elevate? Is that part of the national strategy here? From what you've been observing. Is that the way the market should work? Is this an appropriate strategy to build sort of economic trust across the supply chains?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the supply chain risk is a massive one, and it's taken a little while, as we've noted, to kind of catch up to all the work that's been doing on internal security, and it's just been sitting out there as a big risk, I guess, waiting, and we've reached the point now where we've definitely identified that it is very much a national concern, and there's a lot of focus in on it, which is entirely appropriate because our suppliers, third-party suppliers, and their suppliers as well represent a massive part of our attack surface. So and whether that be just in manufacturing or in more traditional supply chain, or whether that's potentially our third parties being breached and then being used as a vehicle to come into our organisations. There's lots of different vectors there. So it is a real challenge, though. It is hard to do it effectively, and it's a risk-based view on that as well. But it could be something as simple as having that trust and understanding that your organisation has a certification or has a framework that they assess against that's indicates that they've reached a level of trust that they can then you can transact with, and the ISOs are a perfect example there. But often there's more detailed type assessments you want to do as well around how they interact and what they do. So, but I think the spotlight's definitely on it, and we've seen that with some of the frameworks and attention coming out of Department of Home Affairs and these things around third party risk.
And I wonder if organisations are doing enough with their stakeholders as well. It's not just their third party, but their customers, all of their stakeholders that they need to deal with. I'm doing a cybersecurity awareness training session this week to deliver just basic cybersecurity awareness for members of the public, and that's all part of the national strategy. So it's really dealing at the front level. And just in reflection, I'm just thinking I don't see a lot of organisations doing much cybersecurity awareness training for their customers at that level. They tend to see an email saying, "Don't answer any email from us. It's a scam." And it's like, okay, well, I don't know how much you're really educating your customers other than just covering your own reputation. There's a question here from Don. Thanks, Don. What strategies can organisations use to develop trust in supply chain partners beyond the first tier? And I suppose in that strategy, and maybe to you, Reshma, without having the burden on the main provider, where does that burden sit? Should the large organisation carry that burden, or is it a matter of them handing it over through their supply chain and creating costs, right? Because we don't want to create cost or create a compliance issue. We need to be more problem-solving focused.
Yeah, I think this is an area where organizations should realize upfront that the transferring of the risk with third parties still remain with them. No matter how much education you do your due diligence when you bring them in, the risk is still yours as an organization. Now, so the next step then becomes, what are the other things that I can do as an organization when I do my business with third parties that I can maintain that relationship, but also protect what they're holding for your organization. And those could be your regular checks you do with them. If you need to go and look at their controls on site, if needed be, you need to go out there and do that, and do those sort of controls with them, check those controls. You could also have a very regular relationship with them, for them to come and understand where the organization is, their pace, and not just making all around just this is the 100 things that you need to meet, and that's the end of the story. I mean, it's a very good list to be onboarding. And, I think we've mentioned already about saying, if you don't have these things in place, we don't want to do business with you. I would like to stick and stop over there, but I don't think ideally it happens that way. Sometimes they are the only cheaper option, or they're the only vendor that you want to work with, which provides all solution for your organization. But what can you have in place that you can always regularly check? There's a big thing in where I'm currently working is they have a big program around deleting data with what is not needed within internally or externally with the business that they deal with. So if the business has come to an end, or the transaction has come to an end, and you've met those retention requirements, you're supposed to delete it. So ask for those attestations or sign-offs from them to say that you have taken it off your ecosystem. And in that way, you're also minimizing your risk, because you go, I've managed it somehow. But ultimately, end of the day, use that risk-based approach, but the risk always remains with the organization. But having that healthy relationship with your third parties and vendors that you deal with, trust them, because you've brought them in for a reason. You've trusted their platforms, and you build the trust with them. So continue that relationship. It's not that they're in and then you forget about it. So you need to have that continuation of that relationship.
Nice. And I'm just looking through the report. There's a digital trust ecosystem framework that ISACA has developed. I don't have a link for that, but I'll stick it in there, and I'm sure just Google that, it'll be available. Maybe to Evan, how, from a compliance framework, is that how sort of Vanta is looking at trust? Yeah. Is it trust in the platform, or is it trust within sort of the outcomes? How would you sort of describe the focus?
Yeah, I like that you mentioned. So DTEF, that's the framework that I was mentioning a little bit earlier, and Jamie was also mentioning, that the ISACA framework. I really like how that's pulling various kind of elements of trust together. From a Vanta standpoint, we deal with numerous frameworks dealing with privacy and security and risk and the likes. The ones that one that I really like is SOC 2. SOC 2 reports are primarily used. Well, with any organization providing a service, they're really popular in the SaaS space, which I've played in for a number of years. They talk about trust from a point of integrity, confidentiality, privacy, processing integrity. What else did I not mention? Security, right? So a couple of kind of like elements of trust, but not necessarily all. So there's a few frameworks that are going to be touching on various things that are different like that. So SOC 2 really covers that well. Another and how Vanta is kind of like approaching is like framework first. We can all do a lot of great things where we say like, well, this is the right thing. What's the right thing to do? What's the wrong thing to do? But leading with a framework is often like really helpful. One of the frameworks I love when it comes to supply chain security specifically. Now, this is a UK framework, is NIS2. It's an amazing framework. It works really well. Again, if you're based here, you're not necessarily going to align with it, but it has some specific requirements. Super interesting to read through frameworks like that and see what those requirements are, because ultimately industry kind of converges on itself when it comes to requirements. You're going to see UK being a lot more like hard off the line in terms of requirements. But really good to kind of look what they're doing, with NIS2 supply chain. They've got like a number of requirements where it comes to incident reporting and your accountability for the corporation and business continuity, not necessarily always looking at all of the security elements. So it's your combination of a lot of frameworks that are going to help you demonstrate and put yourself into that position. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure Jason and Jamie and Reshma, you've probably got some better opinions in terms of what you're seeing that side in Australia.
What's interesting on frameworks and the global nature, particularly given the current environment. Jamie, on the global board, I take it you're hearing similar things globally, particularly on supply chain, third-party risk management, how that is important for members. Just a general, maybe a context with sitting on the global board, how this resonates, particularly when we're talking about US, UK frameworks. It definitely resonates here in Australia as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a major focal point. We're seeing it across the globe. There's some NIST guidance that's been around for a little while now. Specifically, I think it's a NIST 800 around supply chain framework. In Australia, we've got ASD and Department of Home Affairs that have both issued guidance. I think there's some critical infrastructure guidance as well. So it's being picked up in a number of different frameworks, and I think most holistic frameworks now will have a supply chain element, given how critical that risk factor is, and it also interplays, I guess, with particularly for us in Australia, but also with its global context into the whole geopolitical aspects, because we're talking foreign interference is one not insignificant part of supply chain risk, and that sort of ties into the issues as well and how that comes together. So some interesting dynamics there, and obviously right at the heart of kind of risk in general across the globe at the moment, with what's happening in lots of different sort of theatres. So I think it's a pretty key risk for most organisations.
There's it's interesting, again, being in the third session and coming off the back of our privacy session. It's very relevant as to how companies are grappling with this and the business case for it. I suppose one area we haven't covered is the AI aspect, and we kind of finished the privacy session off on where privacy fits within the organisation, and then also the adoption, I beg your pardon, of technology like AI. Where would you generally find trust fitting within the organisation? Who would have responsibility or accountability for it? And how it might be structured? Is any thoughts there? I have some ideas in terms of how it might be broken down, but trust as an ecosystem for an organization, there's security and privacy in there, but it's not everything. There's things like quality and the like. Maybe to you, Jamie, I'll put you in the hot seat there. Yeah, who has responsibility and accountability for trust in the context we're discussing?
Yeah, and you know, with in the context of AI, but even more broadly, you look at all those different elements: quality, availability, and obviously security, privacy, and resiliency is in there as well. But so is ethics and transparency and these things. So I think there's individual contributors across that environment. Security will typically be the security teams. You may have different teams around quality within technology, for instance. But in terms of an overarching layer, and the AI context is a good one here because it crosses over all of those elements. Often it's either executive sponsored or there's a legal context in there as well. In terms of particularly if it's an AI that has any kind of externalization, I think there's a lot of governance and question marks around the use of AI and that ethical layer and how it interacts with the public. So I think there's definitely some elements there. But yeah, so increasingly we're seeing a legal aspect and a governance aspect around that, and it's coming up into the executive layer. So it will definitely have more tactical teams running day-to-day aspects of that. But from a broader perspective, I think trust is a board level issue at the end of the day, or all of the various elements of trust. We've discussed most of these elements, in the last year on the ISACA board. So, privacy, security, but equally you're talking about ethics constantly, resilience of your organisation, integrity of your organisation. All of this stuff is just a regular board level conversation. So I think that's where it starts.
Well, is that not the carrot and/or a stick for the security teams and the controls for the discussion? And I think maybe to Reshma, the discussion, the language that the security teams and even the privacy teams, we touched on that earlier, but from a security viewpoint, if the security can talk the business language, which comes into trust, so they should really be talking to their legal team or their head of governance. If they can talk the right language, they're reasonably. I suppose where I'm going is I'm struggling to understand how budgets are getting cut when the business case is sort of given there and it's a legal requirement. There's some legal frameworks there for this, so there's no lack of want or no lack of argument to go, hang on, how can you be cutting my budget? It's going to hit us here, which will create legal risk and the like. Is the security teams talking the right language?
I think it's not just a security thing. I think security has the easy hand here when it comes to this part. I think on the budget side of it, it's probably harder for other teams, the AI team or the data team in other parts of the organization, which is part of the same ecosystem that we're talking about. It's very important. Security is there to provide that protection layer for everything what the organization is doing. But at the same time, we're talking about building that trust and talking with the business, like you're saying, are they talking the right language? Are we letting the business made aware that how important it is for them to say, for example, when it comes to AI and AI adoption and the deployment of AI, whether the right data has been used. And again, that will go back to security going and talking with the data governance team and validating with them whether the right integrity of the data and the right quality of the data has been used by the AI team, which are developing the systems for the business, right? So it's like I said, it's a whole same ecosystem with same organization we're talking to, and it all needs to fit in and show the importance of it. And it's not always about the money that just keeps going to security, because they are the visible side of the work that they're doing. So yeah, it is very important for everybody to work together and not in their silos. That is not my area to worry about, and speak the same language 100%. And then show that value, that why it is important to have the human oversight on the AI side of it, because that's important and that's building trust. We need to have transparency because Privacy X says we need to do that. We need to talk about data governance with the data team and to tell them to say, have you been validating the data? Have you got the right data quality? And do we know who the owner is of that data before another part of the business uses that? And that's, again, building trust within them. Also going into fairness and non-discrimination and all of these things that are going into our AI, and we don't know where that's going at the moment. So it's a very big conversation that organizations have to challenge at this stage.
Even trust with employees as well, right? So if you're implementing AI on a productivity level, you're still going to need to have a degree of trust within your workforce.
Yes, and that also comes back that you need to disclose that, you need to discuss that. And it's a whole level of different conversations, which I think everyone's exploring at the moment.
Well, look, we've got 15 minutes. Who was that, Jason then, or Erin? Someone?
I think I was going to say something on that, and like Reshma, you touched on that really well. And yeah, I was going to mention SOC again, and definitely this is not going to be kind of like guidance, go and do this. But you look at SOC 2, and one of the things I really love about it is how it incorporates the COSO framework. So the first section of SOC is often really about the controlled environment and internal controls around integrity and ethical values and the likes. So the COSO 10 principles are kind of like really 10 things to kind of go and look at. I'm not going to say this is going to identify all of your AI risk, but effectively all what we're doing is organizations are trying to manage risk in generally. If those organizations themselves are at the heart trying to make the right ethical decisions, they're going to be doing the risk assessments in the right area. Now, what was really interesting is when you look at the State of Trust report, I think it was 37% of organizations are conducting AI risk assessments. So, that should be, again, we might not necessarily know the methodologies to do that, but 37%, that fell to 28% in Australia, and it increased to 42% in the UK. There's a difference there. It could be due to a number of factors, Europe again pushing with that AI Act right from the beginning. But are we assessing for our fairness and bias, as you mentioned in our assessments? Or do we just talk about bias and fairness, or do we actually go and assess that? Do we go and assess the AI that we're building for prompt injection? Go look at OWASP top 10 AI risks. Are we actually assessing against those risks? Are we just talking about them? Is a really, really interesting one. I would kind of like love to dig into more. I wish I had the data on it. But yeah, that's kind of like some of the stuff that I'm seeing on my end, and even coming from large orgs that did assess risk a lot around AI and developing any AI.
Well, you would think if they don't have their trust sort of frameworks in place already, and then put AI and start to introduce AI on top of that, you can see there's going to be plenty of scope for errors. Jason, thoughts on this area?
Yeah, no, thank you. We look at AI, it's a very broad area and lots of things to think about. But an organization, if they're using AI or if they're creating AI to sell or what have you, you have to think about trust for all your internal stakeholders, all your external stakeholders. And when I've been doing more AI assurance work and using things like SOC 2 framework and things like that, because companies do want to understand if they're either using AI or deploying it, that it hits all those different risk areas that were just mentioned. And I was even reflecting a little bit through the conversation last year, Evan and I, when we were at ISACA's global conference, we hopped into the autonomous vehicle, self-driving, and for a New Zealander, that was kind of unique because we don't have that here. So, and then all of a sudden the question mark becomes, can I trust that? As a user, it's like, how do I know I'm safe if I'm getting in the car and all this other stuff? So it's a whole, I was thinking about, we use the word value chain, but I'm almost thinking we use the word trust chain because it's forever pervasive from the end user all the way up to that third party.
Yeah, well, can I just add something, Chris, on this? So Jason and I work for the organization that does autonomous vehicle, and that's exactly where I am. And just to comment on to Evan, I think the take on the AI risk assessment and things in Australia will go up year by year. And to be honest, that's my day job. That's what I do. And I've seen and I guess can speak for my organization and not ISACA here, where I have seen, because we do so much work on the AI side and the build of the AI, those AI frameworks we talk about, those guardrails and guidelines that we talk about, assessments, AI risk assessment or impact assessments, things like that. These questions are part of that. How do you measure the fairness? How do you measure? And we will start seeing those metrics around the measurement, and these things will contribute to how we're building trust with our AI. And it's going to just go up and higher in Australia. So it's a really good space to watch.
The other one is the emergence of new roles. We were talking again from this morning, talking about privacy, but I mentioned I did an interview at Avalon with the Air Force. So the Air Force have a AI sort of project, and they have a responsible AI lead. They actually have someone in place to make sure it's being done in a responsible manner. And I imagine most organisations are going to need to have that, or allocate somebody or nominate somebody to fulfil that role, simply because you need that sort of point of accountability. To finish off, given the time, I thought I'd come to each of you. Which is more important, cybersecurity, privacy, or trust? Out of the three within this series, which would be classed as the most important? And maybe Reshma, will come to you.
Okay, I'll talk from as a risk professional here. I would come from a place of where would I get the most attention? So not me personally, as in where would my execs get the attention? Where would the directors be concerned about, or the way they would start with? And I always start with when I used to work at the bank, it's the same thing. You start with the regulator, you start with compliance. So you scare them off with those things of where you would be non-compliant and where you'd breach things. So it's about the laws and the legislative requirements, or your X, and where you'd be non-compliant. So that's a good place to start with. And we spoke about, our SOCIs or Essential 8, and there's so many things in Australia you can talk about. So that probably is a good place to start. I don't think there's a favorite place, but if you look at it from a compliance perspective, I think that's a good place to start, and then to diverse and then go, well, this is where security fits in, and this is where compliance, privacy comes in, and so on.
Okay, so trust, I think you're in the trust camp as being the most important. Jason?
Yeah, no, I was thinking about that. At first I was going like, well, how can you differentiate them? But then I started to think about it and go like, well, look, you could have good cyber, but still have a privacy breach and not build trust with people. You could have good privacy, but that doesn't mean that you have good cyber or trust with people. But if you build that trust and we do it right, then that means you, by default, should have effective cyber, effective privacy, and all that stuff. So I'd probably sit in the trust camp.
Okay, very good. Evan, we'll close with Jamie, but Evan?
Yeah, I want to say 100% trust. Like, again, working in security teams for a long time, you've effectively got your privacy, your security, your enterprise risk management silos in terms of how we protect a business. And even your AI coming in. For far too long, organizations have seen their mandate to succeed as more important than effectively the countries and the people that they serve. When you go and trust a parent, you're going to trust them on the care, not the fact that they're going to eventually pull the rug under your feet. I think citizens, individuals for far too long have had the rug pulled under their feet because of disjointed function around trust. We're trying to sell trust. We're not really trying to build it, and we're not overly worried about breaking it. And unfortunately, you see settlements out of court and the likes when that happens. Because actually trust was a number and not necessarily something being built. So it was a sales prop. So I really think trust is the most important. I think there are a lot of organizations that can demonstrate that they can do better in the space of trust.
And we have seen it with some massive brands in Australia, in the Australian context, some massive brands, household names have lost their way. In that, I think you really nailed it in terms of trust as a number that they can manipulate. Jamie, what's your thoughts on this one? And even reflecting on what Evan's just said as well as to how do organisations go wrong? You know, there must be someone at the table putting these aspects, what we're talking about today, aside and going for a number of growth. So yeah, just where does it sit for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say audit, but that wasn't one of the answers. So I'll also go with digital trust. But no, I agree. It's so many different dimensions, the concept of trust, and you know, I think businesses at that strategic level are looking at all of these aspects, whether they call it digital trust or whether they look at it as individual kind of functions. It's still ultimately that trustworthiness at the end of the day, and it is cultural, and it could be a security breach that all of a sudden we no longer trust a particular entity, but it can also just be the way they handle our information. Now, if they're selling our information to a third-party political party for so that you can get spammed, or they're doing something like hitting you with marketing or ads because they're tracking your movements on the net, all these things lead to a concern with trust, and it can really impact in today's society the perception we have of those organisations. So, and big tech, unfortunately, is right at the focal point of, do we trust them or do we not? Because we know they're using our data for any number of different reasons. So for me, it is digital trust. I think it's interesting in the survey, to come back to that just briefly, but there was lack of leadership buy-in and lack of alignment with enterprise goals were two of the bigger issues with all obstacles with digital trust. But there's a perception that awareness at the strategic level is improving, and we're seeing it with AI. Admittedly, AI's the momentum behind that is because it's amazing when organisations really want to do something and someone at the strategic level is pushing for that, all of a sudden the risk appetite increases. And we're seeing that a little bit with AI. But I think these things are all coming to a good, risk-based view, and it's just going to take a little bit more time and probably some further regulatory sort of awareness as well to make it all sort of come together.
Well, hopefully there's a question here from Don, and you've kind of answered it. Is risk appetite increasing in favour of opportunity around the use of AI? I think last year I would have lent towards, there seems to be a bit of a race on whatever AI is and whatever tools we can get. Let's start to use them. This year seems to be a little bit more balanced and a bit more of a risk-based approach. So I think it is going to balance itself off, and I think that's the opportunity here for ISACA members. Is you're in the forefront of this. Particularly whether you're in audit, risk or compliance. This is the main game right here. So look, on that note, we're going to close off. I think I've still got my slide up here. Any closing comments from the panel on this? And we've got a lot to sort of wrap up on tomorrow. But your general take on today. Do you think we have just gone sort of full circle, or do you think we've kind of nutted out what the report was about? Maybe to Evan?
Yeah, I really like actually what Jamie mentioned just in those last points there as well. And I'll touch on that again. I think I'm thinking back to, again, the security days. We eventually charged someone in the IT with IT security. We then realized that doesn't quite work. And then we kind of said, well, security is everyone's responsibility, which is one of my favorite and worst statements of all time, because yes, it is everyone's responsibility, but giving somebody responsibility with no budget, with no skills, no people, no process, no tools is kind of like really blank. It's not really like putting your money where your mouth is. So I do think, we'll say effectively leadership, accountability. Single leader is always better than multiple. Otherwise, again, you get to that problem of everyone's responsible for trust. So I guess for everyone on the call today listening in, who is the individual at your organization that is going to be charged with, or say charged not in a negative sense, accountable for that, building that trust. And it doesn't have to be a formal role at this point, right? Maybe we will see that at some point, like we did with privacy frameworks. But yeah, having somebody really responsible rather than just saying to an organization, we should all be ethical. Which is good and fun.
And I think that maybe that's sometimes where organisations go wrong. Too many leaders, the business units get so big, they start going their own way, and at a board level, they sort of lose touch. But it's definitely something we see in the market on an ongoing basis. Look, thank you so much, Evan, Jamie, Jason, and Reshma. Great session today. And again, the hour goes quite quickly on a very broad topic like this. Then for tomorrow, same time tomorrow, 1 o'clock, we're going to wrap it up on cybersecurity, privacy and trust with the three. Jason Wood will kindly join us tomorrow as well. But we're going to have Zay from Sydney chapter and Chirag, who was with us yesterday on cybersecurity from Sydney. We'll have Abby and Jason from Auckland and Bharat Bajaj from ISACA Melbourne. So we'll have all three there together and we'll wrap up this particular series. I mentioned we're going to be in Melbourne on the 18th of June, so watch out for that. We'll look at robotics, autonomy and AI. We talk about trust and someone mentioned driverless cars today. We have physical robots coming through. We kind of tend to trust what they're doing and what they're moving around our cities and streets for as well. We have our Robotics, Autonomy, AI and Cyber Conference in October, which is part of IAC. And thank you very much for attending. I'm just losing my voice now. I've been doing these webinars for 2 days. But thank you so much. I'm going to close the session off. Appreciate that, Don, and your participation today, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you very much to our panelists.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
See ya.
Thank you.
Everyone.